want to do a couple of songs by way of introduction to Pastor Chuck Baldwin. Some of you got to hear him this morning at breakfast, and some of you will have the privilege of hearing him right now. But Pastor Baldwin spoke about several things this morning. One was about raising up again pastors in pulpits in America that would be watchmen on the walls, like we had in early America. The other was about the status of the church, either being under Jesus or under Caesar. So we're going to do a couple of songs that Ann wrote. One of them I wrote, one Ann wrote many years ago, that talk about exactly just that, to set the stage for what Pastor Baldwin wants to come share with you. This is called Watchman. Watchman. Thank God for Pastor Baldwin and many others like him that are standing up in this hour.
Yeah, there have been a lot of pastors over the years, not a lot, but a significant few who have been so faithful, and I'm sure Chuck is very familiar with names like Greg Dixon and Everett Sullivan and Bob McCurry and big hit parade of guys who stood against unbelievable, overwhelming odds. A lot of them have lost virtually everything but their faith. So I want to dedicate this song to the Patriot Pastors of America.
Well, it's my pleasure and honor to present to you this morning a man who represents the words that were just sung in those songs. One that I'm sure will go down in history for restoring the spirit that you just heard in that song. I present to you Pastor Chuck Baldwin. Come to speak.
Thank you very much. Boy, it's great to be here. Awesome. I love the facility. This is a great idea. I don't know who came up with this, but wow, what a great venue. It's awesome. And you folks, it's great to meet you. Some of you I've only known through the writing and the columns and the things that you've read, and now some of you I get a chance to meet face to face. And it's great to see you. It's good to see my good friend Matt Shea again. And boy, what a great legislator you've got with Matt Shea. If we could somehow duplicate him and get him out in all the legislatures around the country, we'd go a long way to restoring liberty here in our land. So Matt, it's great to see you and keep up the good work. I had a breakfast meeting earlier this morning. I had a chance to meet with some of the other elected officials that you have here in the area, and some really, really good people here in Eastern Washington State that are standing for the Constitution and for freedom, and that's always great. I was telling the folks at breakfast that I think what we ought to really do, you know, instead of trying to save America, is we just need to take the Continental Divide at Montana and then cut a big swath and then go down and, you know, take Idaho and Eastern Washington State, cut out the southern part of Alberta, maybe a little bit of Wyoming and northern part of Colorado, and just make a brand new country out of it. It'd be the freest country in the world, wouldn't it? This is great. This is good to be. Feel like being home here. This is like Montana. We moved from Florida to Montana, my family and I, 5 heads of households. I don't know how you know the story, but we were in Florida for 35 years and started a church there and built it from scratch. And in 2010, all of us, after 2 or 3 years of real prayer and study and meditation, left the southeast and moved to northwest Montana in the Flathead Valley. And that would have been 5 heads of households, 18 people in total. And we all settled in the Flathead Valley, really, really enjoy it. We started a brand new fellowship there called Liberty Fellowship that meets every Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock. We meet at the Hilton Garden Inn Conference Center every Sunday. And we have a couple hundred people or more each Sunday that fellowship with us. And people are moving to the Flathead Valley from all over the United States. We've had probably 30 or 40 families that have already moved to the valley since we've been there. People just keep coming. I don't know what it is that God is doing, but God is putting it in the hearts of people to come to this Rocky Mountain region of the Northwest. And I'm not exactly sure what the Lord has in mind to do. It's bigger than Chuck Baldwin or James Rawls or Joel Skousen or any of us. It's something that the Lord is doing, and I'm not sure what it's going to be yet, but I'm excited to be here in this part of the world. I just think this is the tip of the spear for the freedom fight in the United States of America. I really believe that, and I guess I want to kind of continue the theme that I was talking a little bit about this morning at the breakfast. Since I've been introduced as a pastor, and that's what I've spent so much of my life doing, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how that relates to the issues that bring us here together today. I think we would all agree, I really believe this is true, that if the pastors of our churches, regardless of denomination, if they were standing in the pulpits each Sunday and they were the watchmen on the wall that God would have them to be, we wouldn't be having the problems in America that we're having today. We really would not be. This is a spiritual battle, ultimately. We are wrestling not simply with flesh and blood. We are dealing with principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. This is a spiritual battle. The difference between colonial America, 1775 and 1776, and modern America, 2013 and beyond, is the fact that they had an energized, enthusiastic pulpit that was not afraid or ashamed to declare the principles of liberty to their congregations every Sunday. They were such a feared group that the British Crown gave them a moniker during the War for Independence. They were called, by the British Crown now, they were called the Black Regiment, or the Black Robed Regiment. They were called that because all of them had a tendency to wear long black robes in the pulpits. And so the British Crown simply identified them as the Black Regiment. They were the ones that sounded the clarion call for liberty and freedom from the pulpits of colonial America. And without them, there would have been no Lexington Green, there would have been no Concord Bridge, there would have been no Bunker Hill, there would have been no Declaration of Independence, there would have been no Constitution, there would have been no United States of America. It was the patriot pastors, as much as it was the steadfast statesmen, that caused America's birth. Let me give you a few stories along this line to help try to illustrate what I'm saying to you. We all know about the Minutemen, and Stuart gave a great presentation, by the way, just a few moments ago. Thanks, Stuart, for what you brought to us. The Minutemen of 1775, April 19, on Lexington Green. Most historians overlook this, and most Christians don't even realize this, that the vast majority of the Minutemen, the men who actually stood on Lexington Green on the early morning hours of April 19, 1775, where the shot was fired, heard around the world, and the War for Independence began, was a group of men, mostly from the Church of Lexington, pastored by a man by the name of Jonas Clark. Jonas Clark had pastored that church for many years. Nobody seems to be able to identify what denomination he was, but he was a pastor at the Church of Lexington, Lexington, Massachusetts, on April 19, 1775, when this event occurred. The Minutemen were mostly the male congregants from his church. In fact, when we talk about Lexington Green sat right outside the front door of the Lexington church. Those men that stood on Lexington Green were literally standing on the church property where they worshiped each Sunday. Now, how could they do this? How could those men, about 75 in number, stand in front of 800 heavily armed British troops? How could they do this, and why would they do this? The only reason is because Pastor Clark had been teaching them for years and years and years the principles of religious liberty, the principles of Christian resistance, the principles of authority under God, the principles of jurisdictional authority according to the rule of God. These men understood the natural law principles of liberty extremely well. They understood when they got the warning from Dr. Joseph Warren through Paul Revere that the British were about to march on Concord for the purpose of seizing the weapons, the firearms that were stored there, and arresting Sam Adams and John Hancock, who, by the way, were staying as guests at Pastor Clark's home when the British began their march on Concord. They knew that those men were in the Lexington-Concord area. They didn't know exactly where they were. Where they were is in Pastor Clark's home. When they got the word the British were coming to seize the guns and to arrest Hancock and Adams, those men, now we call the Minutemen, the male congregants from that church, assembled in line, muskets in hand, on the green outside the very doors of the church that they worshiped every Sunday. When the British troops came forward and saw them standing in line with muskets in hand, they immediately opened fire on those colonists. According to the sermon that was preached a year later, in 1776 on April 19, by Pastor Jonas Clark, where he recounted the eyewitness testimony of what happened on that fateful day, he described the fact that 8 men in that assemblage, there at the colonists, 8 men were immediately killed by the British fire that had just erupted. Immediately fell dead. The other colonists began to seek cover and return fire. Obviously, the troops were in such numbers that they could not hold them at Lexington. They marched on to the Concord Bridge. By the time they got there, the colonists had began to assemble at the bridge in such numbers now that they were able to resist the 800 British troops that had come. And as Stuart told you, they began to fire with such accuracy, and the British troops began to fall with such rapidity that they began to retreat back to Boston. The colonists made them pay for every step along the way, fired at them as they retreated, and our war for independence began. So the next time you hear about the Minutemen and Lexington and Concord and the shot fired heard around the world, remember that that was Pastor Jonas Clark and his men at the Church of Lexington. It was Christian men and a Christian pastor holding the line for religious liberty that started our war for independence. We owe this country to the patriot pastors of New England in 1775 and 1776. That's what's missing today. What's missing today is that we have men in the pulpits that are not willing to address the essential issues of liberty that affect our very lives. How many times have you heard in Sunday school or Bible school or whatever, you've heard the story of Daniel in the lion's den? You've heard the story of Daniel in the lion. Heard the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the burning fiery furnace. And they tell these Sunday school stories and they talk about these heroes of the Old Testament and the New. But you know what? They never apply those stories to what's going on today. Hey, wait a minute. Daniel broke the law when he opened the windows of his home and prayed openly to God. He violated the laws of men when he prayed. Hey, wait a minute. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego violated the laws of men when they refused to bow to the image of Nebuchadnezzar when they heard the music play. And they were cast into the fiery furnace. And I know the story is off, well, God delivered them from the burning fiery furnace. But that's not the real story. The real story is what they said to the king before they went into the burning fiery furnace. And what they said to the king was, "O king, we're not careful to answer you in this manner. We know what we're doing here. Look, if our God wants to deliver us from your burning fiery furnace, He's able to do it. But if our God decides to not deliver us from your burning fiery furnace, we still are not going to bow to your image." That's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's the story of Daniel. That's the story of the entire book of Judges. It's the story of Simon Peter, who said we are going to obey God rather than men. And so what has happened is somehow or another over the last several years, the pastors in churches, the pastors of our churches have been taught a fallacious, erroneous interpretation, especially of one chapter in the Bible, and that's Romans chapter 13. They say that Romans chapter 13 teaches that all government is of God, and that we as Christians are supposed to submit to government no matter what. We have no right to question government. We have no right to resist government. In fact, I've heard a lot of major television preachers and radio preachers, if I name them, many of you would know them, maybe you've heard them yourself, and they've said, oh, we're glad that we have freedom of religion in America. We're glad we can preach the gospel freely in America, but our founding fathers were wrong to rebel against the British crown in order to secure our independence. They were unscriptural. They were unbiblical. Forgive me. I cannot think of a more hypocritic stance, a more hypocritic position than for a pastor on one hand to say, oh, I thank God that I have freedom in America to preach the gospel and take all of your money and build my house and build this big ministry and have all this fame and fortune and success. Oh, I thank God for all the freedom to do all this. But the men and women that paid the most awful price imaginable to bequeath to me the liberty that I now use were rebelling against God. Sir, you are a hypocrite. If you think that they were rebelling against God and they did not have the blessing of God on their endeavors, then how dare you celebrate Independence Day on the 4th of July in your church? How dare you fly an American flag in the auditorium of your church? That was the flag of rebellion. It was the flag of resistance. It was the flag that said, don't tread on me. It's the flag that said, no king but Jesus. It was the flag under which every rebel in the colonial cause used to fight for the freedom that you and I now have. And you're going to tell me that they were violating Scripture, that they were against God, that somehow or another they were unspiritual? But you're spiritual. You're spiritual. You're holy because you get up in the church and say that it's wrong to resist. It's wrong to rebel against evil government. And because of this fallacious, erroneous interpretation of Romans 13, our churches and our pastors have been neutered to the point of that they are absolutely ineffective in relating to the things that our people are dealing with today. I don't know if he's still here. My constitutional attorney's son is with me today. His name is Tim. He is an attorney. He's a constitutional attorney. I always like to say that because they're not all constitutional attorneys. And anyway, so he and I, several years ago, collaborated on a book, and we got it over on the table. It's called Romans 13, The True Meaning of Submission. Listen, I hope you'll get this book, and I hope you'll get at least 2 copies, and give one to your pastor, give one to a deacon or a trustee or somebody else in your church, and help them understand the Bible teaching on this subject. The Apostle Paul was not introducing a new topic in Romans chapter 13. He was not presenting a new doctrine. He was simply reiterating something that was as old as the Old Testament in the teachings of natural law and the teachings of revealed law. He was simply recognizing that the duty of the child of God to submit to lawful government and the duty of government to lawfully enact its responsibility as a civil authority. The same chapter that tells you and I how to react to those over us in civil government also tells civil government the responsibilities that they have toward us. You see, under God, every human authority is jurisdictional. The great theme of the Revolutionary War, and I've already mentioned it, but you probably already know it. The great theme of the Revolutionary War was no king but Jesus. That was the theme of the Revolutionary War. What they were saying was, there is no sovereign over us except God Himself. He is the only sovereign. What do we mean by sovereign? A sovereign has authority over every area of our lives. He has responsibility and a duly authorized authority over everything that we do. That is a sovereign. There's only one sovereign, and that is our Creator God. He has authority over every area of our lives. Every other authority is a delegated authority, whether it's a father, a husband, whether it's an employer, or whether it's a a business owner, whether it's a county commissioner, a governor, Congress, president, all authority is jurisdictional and limited. Every person in authority has a delineated scope and boundary associated with his authority. As a father and a husband, when my children were all at home, they're not now, when I had my children at home, I had authority in the home over my children. Now, did that give me the right as a father in my home to come to you as a father in your home, or a mother as a mother in your home, and tell you how to raise your kids?
No.
Do I have a right because I'm a father? Do I have a right to go and tell the businessman how to run his business? You see? Do I have the right to interject my will over the will of others, given the fact that I have limited authority? Well, I'm a pastor of a church, so therefore I can tell the dad how to raise his kids. I can tell the businessman how to conduct his business. All authority is jurisdictional. It's it's a boundary, and it's temporal. God has delegated authority to each of us in small quantities. The same is true in civil government. Civil government does not have unlimited authority over your life and your property and your home. You and God alone have that jurisdictional relationship of authority. The civil government does not have any more right to come and tell you how to raise your kids or how to conduct your business than anybody else in this room would have. No one has the authority to go into someone else's realm of jurisdiction and tell them what they must or must not do. No one can do that. That's limited jurisdictional authority. That's the teaching of natural law. And that's what these men clearly understood. And so whenever the British Crown sent troops to seize these two men and probably kill them, and to take the weapons away from the citizens, which was their lawful means of self-defense, these men recognized that the king was not sovereign, and he had no right to trample on the liberties and the authority that they possessed as fathers and husbands and individuals in their community. And because they understood the jurisdictional authority that God had given to all men, whenever that man overstepped the boundary of the authority that God had given him, he overstepped the jurisdiction that God had given him. At that moment, he ceased to be a civil magistrate and he became a tyrant. And when Ben Franklin said, and he's not the most spiritual of the founding fathers, when Ben Franklin said, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God, Ben Franklin said the exact truth. A tyrant must be resisted. You and I have a duty. It's not just a right to resist a tyrant. It is our duty to resist a tyrant. If we do not resist a tyrant, we are sinning. We are committing sacrilege. We are rebelling against God. Why? Because we have made that tyrant a sovereign over our lives. And this is what the preachers and Christians are not understanding. What they are doing by refusing to resist unlawful, unconstitutional government, they are making idols out of these politicians. They are making idols out of these unlawful governing officials, whether they're bureaucrats or elected. They don't realize that what they are doing is supplanting the lordship of Christ with the idolatry of men who would take the role of sovereign over their lives. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a duty as Christians. If you call yourself a Christian, if you say that you are bought by the blood of Jesus Christ, if you say the Lord Jesus Christ is my Lord, that means you have a duty to resist tyranny in any form that it appears. I'll tell you this too. Tyranny is tyranny where you find it in the Red Square or the White House. It's still tyranny. So this is why we wrote the book, is to try to help people understand the importance of the biblical doctrine of jurisdictional authority and natural law principles of liberty and freedom. Our founding fathers understood this. They sat at the feet of these men. They read the writings of John Locke. They understood these divine principles of natural law as well as the revealed law of God. And these men, when it came, can you imagine today in 2013, 75 men standing in front of 800 armed troops from the central government in front of the church house and saying, no, we will not allow you to come and take our guns. Can you imagine a pastor teaching his people how to resist and the principles on how and when and why and where and how you were justified and when you're not justified? These men understood the principles that are in this book, and that's why we wrote it, to try and educate again the modern church as to what is happening in relativity to Romans chapter 13 and the erroneous interpretation of it. Now, there's several things that are happening here today that are so important to us as freedom lovers and yes, as Christians, and not the least of which is the absolute fundamental right and duty of each of us to defend ourselves. I don't know whether people understand this or not, and if we talk about the right of the people to keep and bear arms. That's the way it's worded in the Second Amendment, and that's great. But it's not simply the right to keep and bear arms. It is the duty to keep and bear arms. It is a duty. It is a duty to be armed and capable of defending oneself. It is a biblical law. Self-defense is a biblical law. It is a natural law that God has given to us as His creation. I find it really amazing. So many of these Christians, we just went through the most egregious attack against our Second Amendment liberties since 1775 in January of 2013, when Dianne Feinstein and Barack Obama collaborated together to introduce the gun ban that was recently attempted in the United States Senate. I don't have to explain this. You all are on top of this, right? You know that that bill had a three-pronged attack. The first thing it would have done, it would have made you a criminal if you own a semi-automatic rifle. If you own a semi-automatic rifle, if that bill had passed, you would be deemed a criminal. You would have had so many weeks or months to turn in that firearm, or they would come and get it at gunpoint. That was the first part of it. The second part of it is that they would have banned high-capacity magazines of 10 or more of any rifle or handgun. The third thing it would have done would be to set up a national database. They call it the instant background check. That was a phony name. What it really would have done it would have created a national gun registration. Now, after the shooting in Connecticut, the potential tyrants really thought they were going to get this bill through. They knew that it might have a little trouble in the House, but they thought they could prevail because you got so many Republicans that are neocon compromisers that don't know really what they believe about anything. They thought that they could have bullied it through, but they felt sure they had it made in the Senate, controlled by the Democrats. the American people, thank God, rose up with such vigor and such resistance. Listen, not one provision of that gun control bill passed the United States Senate, controlled by Democrats. Not one provision. They couldn't believe it. I saw Barack Obama a day or two after the vote came in and they failed, and you know, it looked like he was about to cry, and he was so, I got to tell you, that whatever else happens this year, that made my year. That just made my year. He said it was a sad day for the Congress of the United States. I said, yeah, it wasn't a sad day, but if it was a sad day for the Congress, it was a glad day for the people of America. I'll tell you that. It flopped. Every part of it flopped, failed, nada, zip, zero, get nothing, zilch, gone. That's the good news. The bad news, it failed with no help from the vast majority of pastors and churches across America. Where you went to church? Well, if you go here, forget what I'm about to say. If you didn't go here, the chances are wherever you went to church, the weeks following this attack by the Obama administration to take our guns, I venture to say that the pastor where you attended said nothing from the pulpit about it. The vast majority of pastors across America said nothing at all from the pulpit about it. And if they did say anything, they said something silly like, well, Romans 13, we need to submit to the government, and do whatever they say, that's what we need to do. That was the common theme of the churches across America, and I don't care what denomination it was. That was pretty much what happened in the churches of America. Where were the Jonas Clarks? Where were the colonial black regiment pastors of 1775? Where were they? They said nothing. I've said this before, and I'll say it to this audience here. I think it's time that freedom-loving Christians not only go vote at the ballot box when they have the opportunity. I think they need to start voting with their feet at the church house. Amen. And if your pastor does not have the courage to stand up for your liberties, he is in effect a compliant jerk. I'm going to be nice. I'm being tempted. He is compliant to putting the shackles upon your children and your grandchildren's necks. I don't care how nice he is. I don't care how personable he is. I don't care how friendly he is, how much he knows about the Bible, and how much Hebrew and Greek he knows, and how much he can put on the blackboard and impress you with all of his knowledge and his schooling and his education. If he's not willing to stand in the pulpit for the freedoms and the liberties of your family and mine, he is helping the tyrants put the chains around my children and grandchildren's neck. And you need to vote with your feet and get out of that church and find a pastor who will help you defend the liberties for your children and your grandchildren. If the American Christian would start doing that and voting with their feet and leaving these churches that won't take a stand, it might do something to energize some of these people and awaken them to, wait a minute, maybe there's something I'm missing here. Maybe there's something but you look at these compromising, feel-good churches that are preaching nothing and they're standing for nothing. They're taking no positions, and you look at them and they got the huge buildings and big crowds and money coming in, TV ministries, radio ministries. Thousands and millions of dollars are being poured into these churches by Christians. They are the Christians are facilitating their own slavery. Pastors of America have the power to change the course of the country overnight. Overnight. The pastors have that kind of authority. They have that kind of position. And the British Crown understood that, and that's why they created the moniker the Black Resident. That's why they hated him so much. Let me tell you about James Caldwell. James Caldwell was a Presbyterian minister during the outbreak of the Revolutionary War. The nickname for him is the Fighting Chaplain. And in Springfield, New Jersey, the battle was waging, and the British troops were heavily engaged, and the colonists were doing their best to resist, and they were running out of ammunition. They didn't have any more wadding for their muskets. Reverend Caldwell got a great idea. Wait a minute. He got on his horse, he galloped to his church, the Presbyterian church there in Springfield. He got as many hymn books as he could bundle together and carry. He went back to the front lines. He threw the hymn books down at the feet of the fellows who were doing the fighting, and he said, "There you go, men. Give them Watts. Give them Watts. Give them Watts." Meaning Isaac Watts, the great hymn writer. Tear the songbooks and use the paper for wadding for your muskets. Oh, the British hated James Caldwell. Oh, they hated that guy. They hated him so much that they hired a Tory, an American who was loyal to the British, to murder Reverend Caldwell, which he did. One of his own friends, a man who had sided with the British, a loyalist to Tory, who was paid by the British Crown, murdered and killed Reverend James Caldwell. They weren't satisfied with that. His wife was sitting on her own bed in her own home, holding one of her little children in her arms. British sharpshooters came to her home and shot Mrs. Caldwell in the head as she held her baby in her arms. Burnt down the Caldwell home. Then went to his Presbyterian church and burnt down the Presbyterian church in Springfield, New Jersey. That was the price. That was the price that the pastor James Caldwell, Presbyterian minister in New Jersey, paid so you and I could sit here today in relative freedom and peace. That's the price. We could talk about the many other men who also likewise lost family, sons, daughters, wives, homes, businesses, lost their church, lost everything in the war for independence, so you and I, their posterity, could have freedom. And yet we have these men in the pulpits that call themselves preachers who won't even stand up and say anything to resist some of the most evil machinations that have been known to this country in over 200 years. I say to you, they are not men of God. They are hirelings. They are cowards. Get out of their church. I would rather attend a church where I did not agree with all of the doctrines. I'm not talking about essential doctrines. I'm not talking about the deity of Christ and the blood atonement. I'm not talking about that. Churches have many, many differences of opinion when it comes to secondary doctrines. I would rather attend a church where the pastor and the dogma of the church differed from mine in some of the nuances of secondary doctrine, but where that pastor in church would stand for freedom and liberty, rather than attend a church that I thought was doctrinally pure and dotted every I and crossed every T just right, but the pastor of the church will do nothing to defend the liberties and the freedoms for my family. I'm sorry, I would rather attend the church where I didn't agree with all of the doctrines, but I agree on the fight for freedom. But that is going to be the difference in America for the next 50 years. If we don't have freedom, we have nothing. If the Son shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Stand fast in the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free. And be not again choked in the chains of bondage. That is our duty. It's not just a right, it is a duty. When God created life, He created liberty. And He created the duty of His creation to defend the life that He had given to man. In Genesis chapters 1 and 2, God creates life. In Genesis chapter 9, He said, if man shed man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. God was issuing the responsibility and the duty to mankind to defend the life that God had given to us. And you understand that life is a gift of God, and you understand that liberty is a gift of God. Liberty is a gift of God. Liberty is not the result, and I know that some people aren't going to, you may misunderstand me, I hope you won't. Liberty is not the result of the Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force. There's a lot of countries that have an Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force, and they're not free. Freedom is the result of God's gift to a people. It is the gift of God. Like life is the gift of God, liberty is the gift of God. And liberty must be defended. But it's the gift of God. That's what Jefferson said in the Declaration, right? He said, this is common. This is we all know this. It's just everybody knows it. That all men are created equal. That they are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty. See, this is something that many of our politicians don't understand, especially those guys in Washington, D.C. We don't get our liberties from government. We get our liberties from God. And as such, it is our responsibility to defend the liberties that God has given us. Just like God gave you children. As a mother and father, your responsibility is to defend and protect the children that God gave you. That is a duty. If any man provide not for his own, he has denied the faith, right? He's worse than an infidel. Isn't that what the Scripture says? If a man provide not for his own, what is